Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Close your eyes and let the world grow quiet. Tonight, we journey to a realm of magic and mystery where ancient secrets lie buried beneath time's embrace. A tale of wisdom and courage, of shadows and light, waiting to unfold beneath the stars. In the heart of Middle-earth, an old wizard walks a forgotten path. His name is Gandalf, and in his hands, he holds a rune of untold power, one that should never have been found. But some secrets refuse to stay hidden, and some forces, long asleep, are waking once more. Let the whispers of the wind guide you. Let the flickering embers of the firelight warm your thoughts. And as the night deepens, listen, for the story is about to begin. The moon hung low over Rivendell, casting a pale silver glow over the flowing waterfalls and winding pathways of the elven refuge. The night was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the gentle wind, carrying the soft scent of autumn. Inside the great halls of Elrond's library, a single candle flickered on an ancient wooden table, its glow illuminating the deep lines on Gandalf's face as he pored over a delicate parchment. The Library of Rivendell was a place of knowledge, a sanctuary of wisdom preserved across the ages. It housed texts from across Middle-earth, some older than the kingdoms of men, some written by the Eldar themselves. Few places in the world contain such an extensive record of history, magic, and lost legends. Yet even in this vast repository, what Gandalf sought was elusive. For nights now, the wizard had been restless, haunted by dreams of glowing runes and whispers in languages long forgotten. At first, he dismissed them as mere remnants of old memories, but the dreams did not fade. Instead, they grew clearer, more insistent, guiding him towards something hidden in the depths of time. His fingers traced the delicate ink of the manuscript before him, the words written in an ancient dialect of Quenya, its letters curling like vines upon the page. It was a passage from an old elven chronicle, one that even Elrond had rarely spoken of. Deep in the mountains where shadows remain, beyond the whispering stone and the river's end, lies the rune of Eldarion. It is not of this age, nor the one before. A key to the magic that was, and may it be again. But beware, what is lost is not always meant to be found. Gandalf's keen eyes narrowed. The rune of Eldarion. Even he had only heard of it in passing, in old tales told around dying embers, murmured by those who barely believed their own words. A relic of power from a time when magic had not yet been tamed, when it had flowed through the world like the rivers and winds, untamed and boundless. If such a thing still existed, it would not simply be a curiosity of history. It would be a link to something greater, something that could shift the balance of Middle-earth. And yet, the warning at the end of the passage gave him pause. What is lost is not always meant to be found. Gandalf leaned back in his chair, stroking his long beard in thought. The world was changing. The shadows and the eaves were stirring once more, whispers of dark forces growing stronger. If there was even a chance that this rune contained knowledge that could aid in the coming struggles, could he afford to ignore it? Soft footsteps echoed through the hall, barely disturbing the silence. Gandalf turned his head slightly, sensing the presence before he saw him. Elrond stood at the threshold of the library, his robes flowing like moonlit water, his expression calm yet knowing. "You have been here long, Mithrandir," Elrond said, his voice steady as the rivers of Imladris. "What is it you seek?" Gandalf exhaled slowly, tapping the manuscript with one finger. A whisper of something old. Something I had thought lost to time. Elrond stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the text. For a moment, he was silent, his brows furrowing slightly. "The Rune of Eldarien," he murmured. "A dangerous thing to pursue." "You know of it?" Gandalf asked, though he suspected Elrond would. The Elven Lord nodded, folding his hands behind his back. "Only in fragments of stories. It is said to predate the First Age, before the world was sundered. A rune of pure magic, untouched by the hands of men or even the Eldar. It is unknown who created it or for what purpose." His gaze met Gandalf's. "Why do you seek it?" The wizard sighed, leaning on his staff. "I do not know if I seek it, or if it seeks me. But I cannot ignore the call." Elrond studied him for a long moment, the weight of ages behind his eyes. "The text speaks of the mountains. If the rune truly exists, it has been hidden for countless centuries. And things that remain hidden for so long do so for a reason." Gandalf chuckled softly. "A warning, my friend?" "A caution," Elrond replied. "The power of the past is not always meant for the hands of the present." The wizard nodded thoughtfully. He had lived long enough to know the truth in those words. Many sought power thinking they could wield it wisely, only to be consumed by it. Yet something within him told him that this rune was different, not merely a source of strength, but a key to something deeper. He stood, rolling the manuscript closed with careful hands. "I will tread carefully," he said. "But I must follow this path." Elrond did not try to dissuade him further. He merely inclined his head. "Then may the stars guide you, Mithrandir." Gandalf took his leave of the library, stepping out into the crisp night air of Rivendell. The valley was bathed in moonlight, its rivers glistening like silver veins beneath the sky. The stars above burned brightly, eternal in their silent vigil. He looked up at them, his heart steady. He had faced many roads in his time, many dangers, many wonders. But something about this journey felt different. The past was calling to him, a whisper in the wind, a voice from an age long gone. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of the stars, Gandalf set forth on a path that would lead him into the depths of forgotten history, toward the Rune of Eldarien and whatever secrets it held. The morning in Rivendell was crisp, the air carrying the scent of damp earth and pine as mist wove lazily through the valley. Gandalf stood at the edge of one of the many stone balconies overlooking the flowing waters of the Bruinen, his mind already far beyond these peaceful lands. The Rune of Eldarien, if it truly existed, lay somewhere in the misty mountains, hidden beyond places even the elves seldom tread. The thought weighed on him, not with fear, but with a sense of inevitability. Behind him, the sound of approaching footsteps was soft but firm. He did not need to turn to know it was Elrond. The Elven Lord walked with the grace of his kin, yet there was a quiet heaviness to his steps. He too understood the importance of what was to come. "You leave at first light?" Elrond asked. Gandalf nodded. "Yes. The mountains do not wait, and neither should I." He exhaled, watching the mist curl through the trees below. "I have long walked the paths of Middle-earth, but I do not walk blindly. There is something in this journey that calls me, something beyond mere curiosity." Elrond stood beside him in silence for a moment before speaking. "Then may you find what you seek, and may it be what you hope it to be." Gandalf turned to him, his sharp blue eyes filled with knowing. "You believe I will not return empty-handed?" Elrond's gaze was unreadable. "I believe that no great journey ever ends where it began." The wizard chuckled softly. "Wise as always, my friend." Elrond did not answer, but he placed a small satchel into Gandalf's hands. The weight of it was light, yet the contents felt significant. The wizard opened it slightly and found a few dried herbs, some elven waybread, and a small vial of shimmering liquid, moreover, the elven cordial that restored strength to weary travelers. "You have always been too generous," Gandalf said, though his tone was warm. Elrond simply inclined his head. "Even the wise grow weary, Mithrandir. A gift, so that you may not lose sight of the road ahead." Gandalf smiled, tucking the satchel into his cloak before gripping his staff. "Then I shall walk with lighter steps, though my thoughts may remain heavy." With that, he took his leave, descending the great stairways of Rivendell and making his way toward the stables where his steed awaited him. The journey through Eriador was long, the vast lands stretching endlessly beneath the sky. The golden fields of the west gave way to rugged terrain, where the rivers ran deeper and the air grew colder with each passing day. Gandalf rode with purpose, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. The lands were not as safe as they had once been, and travelers seldom moved alone. By the time he reached the foothills of the Misty Mountains, the air had turned sharp with the bite of winter. Snow had not yet fully settled, but the high peaks loomed in the distance, their icy caps glistening under the pale light of the sun. The path ahead would be treacherous, windswept passes, crumbling paths, and the ever-present danger of what lurked beneath the mountains. As he paused near the ruins of an old watchtower, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps crunching against gravel. He turned, staff in hand, though his grip was more curious than wary. From the shadows of the rocks emerged a stout figure, wrapped in a thick traveling cloak, his beard braided with silver beads. "Ah," Gandalf murmured with a knowing smile. "I wondered why I might run into an old friend." The dwarf pushed back his hood, revealing a face weathered by years yet bright with a knowing gleam. "And here I thought I'd catch you off guard, wizard." "Balin," Gandalf greeted, stepping forward. "It has been some time since I last saw you. What brings you to the feet of the Misty Mountains?" Balin chuckled, resting a sturdy hand on his axe. "The same thing that brings any dwarf to the mountains, rumors of something hidden, something old." He studied Gandalf carefully. "And judging by the look in your eyes, you've been hearing the same whispers." Gandalf tilted his head slightly. "The rune of Eldarien." Balin's expression shifted, his amusement replaced with something more serious. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. I've heard the name before, but only in hushed voices, old stories passed down from elder dwarves. They say it's older than any craft of our own kind, forged before the First Age, before even Khazad-dûm was a thought in the minds of Durin's kin. Gandalf nodded. And do your people know where it may lie? Balin sighed, gazing up at the towering peaks ahead. There are whispers of a hidden chamber deep within these mountains. A place no dwarf has ever mapped, no elf has ever entered, and no man has ever seen. But if the rune is real, that is where it will be. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the distant cry of an eagle soaring high above. Gandalf tapped his staff against the rocky ground, considering Balin's words. This place, Gandalf said, does it have a name? Balin hesitated before answering. They call it the Hollow of Murmurs. Gandalf felt a chill run through him, not of fear, but of something deeper, something ancient stirring in his bones. The Hollow of Murmurs. Even the name carried an eerie weight. I do not ask you to follow me, old friend, Gandalf said. The path ahead may lead to wonders or dangers unknown. Balin snorted. Bah! If I turned away from danger every time it whispered my name, I'd never have left Erebor. Besides, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a wizard walking alone is either up to no good or about to get himself into trouble. Either way, you could use some proper company. Gandalf let out a deep chuckle. Then I gladly welcome your axe, Balin. The two set forth together, their cloaks billowing against the rising wind. The road ahead would be difficult, but Gandalf felt steadier knowing that he was not walking it alone. As they ascended the rocky paths toward the unknown, the whispers of the past seemed to stir with them, growing ever louder as they approached the heart of the mountains. The path through the misty mountains was treacherous, carved by time and the harsh grip of the wind. Jagged peaks loomed above, their snow-capped tips glowing under the pale light of the rising moon. The air was cold and thin, filled with the distant howl of wolves and the whisper of unseen things lurking in the shadows. Gandalf and Balin moved carefully along the rocky trail, their boots crunching against frost-covered stone. The wizard's staff cast a faint glow, illuminating their path as they climbed higher into the heart of the mountains. Balin, though accustomed to such terrain, kept a hand on his axe, his keen dwarven eyes scanning the darkness ahead. This Hollow of Murmurs, Gandalf murmured, his breath visible in the frigid air. How much do you truly know of it, Balin? The dwarf exhaled through his nose, his beard bristling. More than most, but less than I'd like. He tightened his grip on his weapon. It is said that even in Durin's day, the hollow was a place of silence. No birds nest near it, no beasts call it home. The stone itself is strange, unlike any found in these mountains. Some say it was shaped by no hands, neither dwarf, elf, nor man. Gandalf frowned, contemplating the words. He had heard of places like this before, places where time itself seemed to hesitate, where the world held its breath. If the rune of Eldarien lay within such a place, then its origins might be far older than he had dared to imagine. The wind howled louder as they rounded a narrow bend, revealing a vast chasm stretching before them. A deep gorge, carved by forgotten rivers, cut through the heart of the mountains. At its center, Nestled between towering cliffs was a cavernous opening, its mouth dark and unwelcoming, as if the mountain itself had been wounded long ago. Balin grunted. There it is. The hollow. Gandalf studied the entrance with a deep sense of unease. There was something unnatural about it. The stone was smooth, almost polished, as if untouched by time or the elements. No snow clung to its edges, no icicles formed along its ridges. The very air around it felt still. Strange, Gandalf murmured. It feels as though the mountain itself rejects it. Balin nodded grimly. Aye. Even dwarves do not dig here. The few who have tried did not return. A silence settled between them, broken only by the distant echo of falling stones. Gandalf tightened his grip on his staff. Then let us not tarry. The two made their way down the rocky slope, their movements cautious as they descended into the chasm. As they neared the entrance, the sounds of the mountain seemed to fade. The wind no longer howled. The distant cries of wolves fell silent. Even the sound of their own footsteps seemed dulled, as if the very air inside the hollow swallowed all noise. They stepped into the darkness. The interior of the cavern was vast, stretching beyond what their eyes could see. Gandalf raised his staff, casting a soft light into the gloom. The walls were unlike any he had ever seen, smooth, black stone that reflected no light, as if carved from the very void itself. Faint etchings lined the surfaces, old and worn, their patterns twisting in ways that made the mind ache to follow. Balin ran a gloved hand over the stone. This is no dwarven craft, he muttered. Nor elven, nor human. Gandalf knelt, studying the markings. They were runes, but not any script he recognized. They pulsed faintly under his light, as if responding to his presence. Then came the whispering. It was faint at first, barely more than a breath against the ear. Then it grew, soft voices murmuring in an ancient tongue, their words lost to time. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen, something powerful. Balin stiffened, his hand flying to his axe. Do you hear that? Gandalf nodded, his brow furrowed. The whispers were not hostile, nor welcoming. They were waiting. The wizard stood, his staff held high. We are not alone in this place. Balin took a slow step back. Aye. And I don't think whatever is here has forgotten us. As the words left his lips, the runes along the walls flickered to life. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, and the air shimmered as if reality itself wavered. Gandalf turned sharply, his heart pounding. Something had awakened. The chamber trembled as the ancient runes pulsed with a dim, eerie glow. The whispering voices rose in volume, a chorus of murmurs swirling through the hollow of murmurs like a wind that carried no breath. Gandalf tightened his grip on his staff, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness for movement. Balin, standing beside him with his axe at the ready, exhaled through clenched teeth. I don't like this, wizard. Nor do I, Gandalf admitted, his voice steady despite the strange weight pressing upon his spirit. The runes flickered again, this time forming shapes in the air, wisps of silver light weaving together into symbols that hovered for mere moments before vanishing. The patterns were unlike any writing Gandalf had ever seen, shifting and changing as if they were alive, resisting comprehension. The whispers changed. No longer were they a collection of indistinct voices, they were forming words, ancient and hollow, as if spoken from the depths of time itself. "Why, have you come?" The voice was neither welcoming nor hostile. It was simply there, vast and unfathomable, like the deep currents of the ocean. Gandalf took a cautious step forward, his staff illuminating more of the cavern's vastness. "We seek the Rune of Eldarien," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the emptiness. "A relic of power, spoken of in the oldest tales." The silence that followed was heavy, stretching unbearably long before the whispers resumed, threading through the darkness like threads of wind. The rune was lost, for a reason. Balin shifted uncomfortably, gripping his axe tighter. "That doesn't sound promising." Gandalf remained focused, unshaken. "What reason?" he pressed. The cavern seemed to breathe. The runes upon the walls pulsed again, brighter this time, casting ghostly shadows that twisted and danced. Then, from the center of the chamber, the stone floor rippled as if water had been disturbed, and something began to rise. A figure emerged, not flesh and bone, but a shape formed of light and shadow, flickering as though caught between existence and oblivion. Its form was tall, draped in something akin to a cloak woven from mist, its face hidden beneath a hood of swirling darkness. But the eyes, if they could be called eyes, burned with a pale silver fire. Balin took a step back, muttering a curse in Khuzdul. "Gandalf, tell me you expected this." The wizard did not answer immediately. He had encountered spirits and remnants of ages past, but this presence was unlike any he had known. It was not a ghost, nor a wraith, it was something else, something older. The figure's voice came not from its mouth, but from all around them, woven into the whispers. "The Rune of Eldarien is not yours to claim." Gandalf met the gaze of the spectral figure, unflinching. "Then whose is it?" The being did not answer immediately. Instead, it lifted one hand, long and spectral, its form shifting as if it could not quite settle into the shape it once had. The cavern dimmed, and suddenly, images began to form in the air. Gandalf and Balin watched in silence as the past unfolded before them. Visions of the First Age. A great city, unlike any known in Middle-earth, shone under a sky that was not the sky of today. Towers of pale stone rose above a land untouched by shadow, its rivers gleaming with light that did not come from the sun. Elves moved through the city, their garments woven with threads of silver and gold, their voices raised in song. Then, the image shifted. A council of robed figures stood in a grand hall, their expressions grave. Upon a pedestal in their midst lay a single stone, no, not a stone. A rune. It glowed with an inner light, pulsating with magic so pure and potent that even through the vision, Gandalf could feel its power. Then came darkness. The city fell. The towers crumbled. Shadows like living things devoured the land, their forms indistinct yet terrible. The sky burned with fire and ash. The rune, once shining, was sealed away, buried beneath the weight of ruin. The vision faded, and they were once again standing in the hollow of murmurs. The spectral figure lowered its hand. It was not made for this age, the voice whispered. Nor for those who seek it now. Gandalf exhaled slowly, his mind racing. A relic from the first age. Perhaps even older. A rune of magic that once belonged to a kingdom lost beyond memory. And now it lay hidden, sealed away for fear of what it might unleash. Balin cleared his throat, his voice wary. That's a lot of trouble for one rune. The spectral being turned its burning gaze toward him. More than you know, son of Durin. Gandalf took a step forward. If it is so dangerous, why leave whispers of its existence? Why call to those who dream of it? The figure did not move. Because some doors never remain closed. The words sent a chill through Gandalf's bones. It was not a warning of threat, it was a warning of inevitability. The rune of Eldarion would not remain buried forever. Someone, someday, would find it. The question was not if, but when. And perhaps, Gandalf realized, it was better that he found it first. The wizard straightened, his staff glowing brighter. Where is it? A long silence followed. Then, the spectral figure extended its arm toward the farthest wall of the chamber. The runes upon the stone shifted, rearranging themselves until they formed a doorway where none had been before. Beyond this path, the whispers intoned, lies what you seek. Gandalf nodded. Thank you. The being did not respond. Instead, it began to fade, its form dissolving into strands of light and shadow until nothing remained but the whispers, slowly fading into silence. Balin exhaled, running a hand down his beard. I'll be honest, wizard. I liked that thing a lot better when it wasn't speaking. Gandalf chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Come, Balin. If the rune lies beyond, we have no time to waste. With cautious steps, the two approached the newly revealed doorway. Beyond it lay a path of stone, leading into even deeper darkness. Gandalf took the lead, his staff illuminating the way. The Hall of Murmurs had given them their answer, but what awaited them in the depths beyond? That was still unknown. Gandalf stepped through the rune-formed doorway with measured caution, his staff casting pale light into the depths beyond. The air was thick, stagnant, untouched by time or wind. Behind him, Balin hesitated for only a moment before following, his axe gripped tightly in both hands. The passage was unlike anything they had seen before. It was not a tunnel carved by tools, nor a natural cavern formed by the slow erosion of water. The walls were seamless, smooth as glass, yet cold as the mountain itself. Strange symbols pulsed faintly upon them, whispering their forgotten language into the silence. Balin exhaled through his nose. I don't like this, wizard. Gandalf nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the unnatural walls. Nor do I. The path led them downward in a slow, deliberate spiral. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, pressing against their chests like unseen hands. There was no sound beyond their footsteps, no distant drip of water, no stirring of unseen creatures. Even the whispers that had filled the Hall of Murmurs seemed to have been left behind, as if whatever lay ahead refused to share its secrets. For a long time, they walked in silence, the only measure of time, the growing weight of darkness around them. Gandalf felt it pressing upon his mind, ancient and watchful. Something was waiting below. Then the path ended. They stepped into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its walls curving outward in an impossible expanse. In the center of the room, set within a circular pedestal of obsidian stone, lay a single object. The Rune of Eldarien. It was smaller than Gandalf had expected, no larger than his palm, yet it pulsed with a brilliance that defied the surrounding gloom. Its surface shimmered, shifting between hues of silver, blue, and deep violet, as if the light within it was alive. Runes, ancient and ever-changing, wove across its form in an endless dance. Balin let out a slow breath. That's it, then? Gandalf took a careful step forward, but something stopped him. A presence. Not physical, yet undeniable. Then the shadows moved. From the edges of the chamber, where even his staff's light could not fully reach, figures began to emerge, dark forms, humanoid yet featureless, rising from the stone itself as if they had been waiting beneath its surface for countless ages. Balin cursed and raised his axe. I knew it wouldn't be this easy. Gandalf did not reach for his sword, nor did he raise his staff in challenge. He simply stood still, watching as the figures took form. There was no malice in their movements, no sign of aggression. Yet there was something deeply unsettling about them, the way they glided soundlessly across the stone, the way their bodies flickered like smoke caught in an unseen wind. Then one of them spoke. You have come to take the rune. The voice was hollow, ancient, layered with countless echoes. It was neither a question nor an accusation. Gandalf met the faceless gaze of the one who had spoken. I have come to ensure it does not fall into the wrong hands. A silence stretched between them, heavy and unreadable. Then another figure spoke, its voice a whisper of wind against stone. It is not yours to claim. Balin shifted his stance. That's what the last one said. Yet here we are. The figures did not move. Their presence was not hostile, yet it was undeniable. They were guardians, watchers, bound to this place as long as the rune remained. Gandalf considered his next words carefully. This relic is no longer safe here. Others seek it, others who would use its power for destruction. The first figure tilted its head slightly, the motion eerily smooth. And you would use it for what? The question was not a trap. It was a test. Gandalf took another step forward, slowly, deliberately. To protect, he said. To understand. To ensure that what was forgotten does not return in ruin. For a long moment, the figures were silent. Then the first one raised a hand. The Rune of Eldarien pulsed. The air in the chamber grew heavier, charged with something vast and unseen. The runes upon the walls flared to life, casting shifting shadows that stretched and twisted. The chamber itself seemed to breathe. Then the rune lifted from its pedestal. It rose into the air, spinning slowly, its inner light growing brighter. The guardians did not move, did not interfere. They only watched. Gandalf extended his hand. The rune hesitated, just for a moment, then moved toward him, its glow wrapping around his fingers like living energy. The instant his hand closed around it, the chamber shuddered. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the stone, a reverberation that carried through the very bones of the mountain. The figures began to dissolve, fading back into the darkness from which they had emerged. Balin looked around, wary. That doesn't seem like a good sign. Gandalf turned to him, the rune resting in his palm. We should leave. Balin needed no further urging. Together, they retraced their steps, moving swiftly back up the spiral path. But something had changed. The weight in the air had lifted, yet an undeniable sense of urgency pushed them forward. As they neared the upper passage, a low rumbling filled the hollow. The stone trembled beneath their feet. Balin cursed. The place is coming down. Gandalf gritted his teeth. The magic that had held this place sealed for ages was unraveling. The rune had been the key, not just to power, but to balance. And now that it was removed, they emerged into the Hollow of Murmurs just as the first cracks split through the cavern walls. Stones fell from the ceiling, shattering against the ground as the ancient chamber groaned in protest. Run! Gandalf commanded. Balin needed no second urging. They sprinted toward the exit, the ground shifting beneath them as the mountain itself seemed to shake. The moment they reached the outer chasm, the entrance behind them collapsed in a thunderous roar, sealing the hollow forever. Dust filled the air. Silence followed. They stood at the edge of the ruined passage, breathing heavily. The sky above was still dark, the stars untouched by the chaos below. Balin looked to Gandalf, his beard dusted with stone. Well, he muttered, I'd say that went well. Gandalf let out a slow breath, looking down at the rune in his hand. It was cool now, its pulsing light subdued, as if resting after so many years in darkness. But the power within it was undeniable. He turned his gaze toward the horizon. The rune of Eldarien was no longer lost. But what its return meant for Middle-earth, that was still to be seen. The stars stretched endlessly above them as Gandalf and Balin stood at the edge of the ruined passage, their breaths still heavy from the escape. The mountain had swallowed the Hollow of Murmurs, sealing away whatever secrets had remained. But the rune of Eldarien was no longer buried in darkness. It rested now in Gandalf's hand, its soft glow casting faint silver light over his fingers. Balin sheathed his axe with a heavy sigh. Well, that's done, then, he muttered, brushing stone dust from his beard. Now what? Gandalf didn't answer immediately. He studied the rune, feeling the pulse of its power beneath his fingertips. It was not like any magic he had encountered before, not the fire of the Astari, nor the deep sorcery of the elves. It was old, older than the mountains themselves. Holding it was like holding a fragment of time long forgotten, a power neither fully awake nor entirely at rest. He closed his fingers around it, hiding its light. We leave this place, he said finally. And we tread carefully. Balin grunted. Treading carefully doesn't seem to be your style, wizard. Gandalf gave him a pointed look, then turned toward the path winding down the mountainside. The night air was cold, the wind carrying whispers of distant lands. Though they had left the hollow behind, something in the wind felt different, charged, watchful. They moved in silence, their footsteps crunching against the rocky ground. Balin walked a few paces behind, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The dwarf was a warrior, and he trusted no dark place to be truly empty, even after it had crumbled to dust. It was hours before they reached the lower slopes of the mountain, where a small camp lay waiting. 2 ponies, tethered to a twisted tree, lifted their heads as the travelers approached. Gandalf reached for his pack, but before he could settle himself, Balin cleared his throat. "What happens now?" the dwarf asked. "You have the rune. The hollow's gone. Where do we take it?" Gandalf lowered himself onto a rock, his staff resting beside him. He considered his words carefully. "Some things are not meant to remain hidden forever," he said. "But neither can they be left unguarded." He looked toward the sky, where the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. "The elves of Rivendell may have knowledge of this relic. And if not, Lord Elrond will know who does." Balin frowned. "Elves," he muttered. "Always elves." Gandalf smiled faintly, but did not reply. He could sense the weight of the rune in his palm, its magic curling around him like an unseen mist. There was no immediate danger, but the power within it was undeniable. He would not wield it, not yet. Balin, still frowning, settled onto the ground with his back against a boulder. "Fine. Rivendell it is," he said, crossing his arms. "But I don't like it, wizard. That thing in your hand, whatever it is, it's not just a trinket." "No," Gandalf agreed. "It is not." The fire crackled softly as the first light of morning crept over the landscape. The mountain behind them was silent, as if it had never held the hollow at all. But Gandalf knew better. Some doors never stayed closed. The first signs of pursuit. They set out at dawn, the road winding through rugged hills and shadowed valleys. Gandalf rode in silence, his mind turning over the visions they had seen in the hollow, the great city lost to time, the council of figures who had once held the rune, and the doom that had followed. The rune itself remained quiet, tucked safely within his robes. But its presence lingered in his thoughts, a weight that would not be ignored. Balin rode beside him, his eyes ever watchful. "Something's wrong," the dwarf muttered after several hours of travel. Gandalf glanced at him. "What do you sense?" Balin scowled. "We're being watched." The wizard did not question him. Dwarves had sharp instincts, and Balin had spent his life navigating the deep halls of mountains and the treacherous paths of Middle-earth. If he felt unseen eyes upon them, then it was not mere paranoia. Gandalf pulled his cloak closer and scanned the ridgelines above. At first, there was nothing but the rolling mist and scattered rocks. But then, there, a flicker of movement, swift and silent. Not an animal. Not a mere traveler. Something else. Gandalf's fingers tightened around his staff. Balin swore under his breath. "I knew it. We weren't the only ones listening to those cursed whispers." The realization settled between them like a shadow. Someone else had known about the rune. Someone else had followed them into the hollow, perhaps not close enough to be seen, but close enough to learn the truth. Now, they were being hunted. Gandalf urged his pony into a faster pace. We must reach the forests before nightfall. Balin didn't argue. They pressed forward, leaving behind the open hills for the shelter of the trees. The forests of a region were dense, tangled with old growth and twisting roots. Here, at least, they had cover. But the presence did not leave them. As the sun began to sink behind the trees, the whispers returned, not the ancient voices of the hollow, but a new kind. The hush of unseen feet upon fallen leaves. The faint shift of branches, as if something passed through them unseen. Gandalf pulled his pony to a stop. Balin did the same. They listened. Silence. Then, a flicker of movement. Balin's axe was in his hand before Gandalf could speak. The dwarf skinned the undergrowth, his expression grim. Come out, whoever you are, he called. Nothing. But Gandalf knew better. He turned, lifting his staff. There is no need for shadows, he said to the unseen presence. Show yourself. The forest held its breath. Then, at last, the hunter revealed itself. A figure stepped forward from the gloom, clad in dark robes that blended seamlessly with the night. A hood concealed their face, but the sharp gleam of steel at their sides spoke of purpose. Balin shifted, preparing for a fight. The figure lifted a gloved hand. I do not come to strike, they said, their voice smooth, measured. I come to warn. Gandalf did not lower his staff. And who are you to offer warnings? The figure hesitated, then reached up, pulling back their hood. A woman's face was revealed, sharp features, dark eyes that held centuries of knowledge. An elf, but not one of Rivendell or Lothlorien. Her armor was worn from travel, her expression unreadable. I am not your enemy, she said. But there are those who will be. Balin grunted. That's vague enough to mean anything. The elf ignored him, her gaze fixed on Gandalf. You do not understand what you carry, wizard. That rune is not a relic of power. It is a warning. And it was never meant to be awakened. Gandalf studied her carefully. Yet here you are, knowing of it. The elf's expression darkened. Because I have seen what happens when it falls into the wrong hands. A long silence followed. The trees whispered in the wind, the weight of unseen forces pressing down upon them. Gandalf exhaled slowly. Then tell me, he said. Who else seeks it? The elf's voice was quiet, but the answer sent a chill through the night. They already follow your trail. The forest whispered around them, the wind threading through ancient branches like fingers stirring a restless dream. Gandalf studied the elven woman before him, his keen eyes searching for truth in her words. Balin, ever the warrior, remained tense, his axe gripped tightly in his calloused hands. They already follow your trail, she had said. Gandalf did not doubt her. The sense of being watched, the flickers of movement in the hills, it had not been paranoia. They were being hunted. And who, he asked at last, his voice calm but edged with iron, follows us? The elf's dark eyes flickered with something unreadable, concern, perhaps, or a memory she wished she could forget. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the deeper parts of the forest, as if listening to something neither Gandalf nor Balin could hear. Then she spoke. "They call themselves the Daughters of Nihil," she said, her voice quiet. "A remnant of the old world. Shadows that should have perished when Morgoth fell, but did not." Balin's expression darkened. "Morgoth's brood," he muttered. "I thought we were rid of that filth." Gandalf said nothing. He had rid of the Daughters of Nihil, though the name had been little more than a footnote in forgotten texts. They were not a cult of Sauron's making, nor were they creatures of the Dark Lord's dominion. They were older. Something apart. "Why would they seek the rune?" he asked. The elf hesitated. "Because they believe it is their right to claim it. To finish what was started long before this age." Gandalf studied her. "And you? How do you know of them?" The elf's gaze met his, unwavering. "Because I was once one of them." Balin let out a sharp breath, stepping back instinctively, his grip tightening on his weapon. "A fine thing to tell us now." The elf did not flinch. "I left them long ago." Gandalf frowned. "And yet you have followed us." She nodded. "To warn you. And to stop them." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken questions. Gandalf felt the rune's presence within his robes, a cold weight against his chest. "They come, wizard," the elf said. "And when they do, they will not ask for the rune. They will take it." Balin scoffed. "Let them try." Gandalf exhaled slowly, his mind moving swiftly through possibilities. "How many?" he asked. The elf's eyes darkened. "Enough." The wizard studied her, weighing trust against necessity. Then he nodded. "We must move." Balin frowned. "We should stand our ground." Gandalf shook his head. "No. The rune is not meant for battle. If they want it, they will not fight us in open combat. They will use the shadows against us." The elf's expression was grim. "He speaks the truth." Balin muttered something under his breath, but relented. "Fine," he grumbled. "But I don't trust her." Gandalf turned to the elf. "What is your name?" She hesitated. "Vale." Gandalf gave a slow nod. "Then walk with us, Vale. And let us hope we're not too late." The flight through the woods. They moved quickly, following the old paths that wound through the forest like forgotten veins. The trees, gnarled and ancient, cast long shadows in the moonlight. The weight of pursuit pressed upon them, unseen but undeniable. Vale led the way, her steps swift and sure. Though Balin grumbled, he followed without argument, his axe never far from his grasp. Gandalf walked between them, his staff a beacon in the shifting dark. They had not traveled far before the first sign of their hunters appeared. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible, drifted through the trees. Not the rustling of leaves, nor the snap of a twig. Something more deliberate. Gandalf slowed. We are not alone. Vale's expression was unreadable, but she nodded. They are close. Balin muttered a curse. Let them show themselves. They will not, Vale said. Not yet. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of something old, something wrong. Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. Then the whispering began. Not the hollow's ancient murmurs, but something far darker. The shadows shifted. Shapes moved at the edges of their vision, half-seen figures gliding between the trees. Balin turned sharply. There! He raised his axe, but as he did, the figure vanished, dissolving like smoke into the night. Vale's voice was firm. Do not let them unsettle you. Balin scowled. They already have. Gandalf took a step forward. We keep moving. But as they did, the whispers grew stronger. Words laced with forgotten tongues wove through the trees, pressing against their minds like creeping fingers. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally across the path. And then, a figure stepped into their path. Tall, draped in tattered black robes, its face hidden beneath a veil of shifting mist. Its presence was not like that of a mortal being. It did not breathe. It did not move as a living thing would. Balin lifted his axe. No more games. Vale's hand went to her blade. This is no game. The figure tilted its head, its voice slipping through the air like oil on water. The rune does not belong to you, Astari. Gandalf did not move. And yet, here it is. The figure did not approach, but the pressure in the air grew heavier, as if the very forest held its breath. Surrender it, the figure said, or be unmade. Balin let out a sharp laugh. Try it, then. Vale's voice was quiet, but firm. They do not bluff, dwarf. Gandalf met the figure's unseen gaze. He could feel the runes pulse against his skin, steady, waiting. He had seen what power did in the wrong hands. He would not let it happen again. No, he said simply. The shadows searched. The figure raised a hand, and darkness swept forward like a living tide, swallowing the light, swallowing the stars. Balin roared, stepping forward with his axe raised, but the darkness wrapped around him, dragging him backward. Gandalf lifted his staff. Enough. Light erupted from the tip, golden and fierce, splitting through the dark like a blade of fire. The figure recoiled, its form twisting, writhing. Vale lunged, her blade flashing silver, slicing through the air where the figure had stood. But it was gone. The darkness withdrew, scattering like mist before the morning sun. Silence fell. Balin stumbled forward, his breath ragged. What in the name of Durin was that? Vale sheathed her blade. The first of many. Gandalf exhaled, lowering his staff. The rune pulsed against his chest, its power barely contained. They will not stop, Vale said. Gandalf nodded. Then neither will we. The road ahead was long, and the storm was only beginning. The forest had grown eerily silent. No wind stirred the branches, no birds called from the canopy above. It was as if the trees themselves held their breath, waiting for what would come next. Gandalf stood at the center of the path, his staff planted firmly in the earth. The echoes of the shadow's retreat still lingered in the air like the fading scent of a storm. The rune of Eldarin pulsed beneath his robes, its power now a steady thrum against his skin. Balin, his breath still heavy from the battle, rubbed at his shoulder where the darkness had grasped him. "I don't like this, wizard," he muttered. "They came too easily. As if they were testing us." Vale, standing a few steps away, nodded grimly. "Because they were." Gandalf exhaled slowly. "They wanted to see how much we knew. How much I understood of the rune's power." He looked toward the distant mountains, where the stars hung low over the horizon. "They will come again. Stronger. And next time, they will not simply test us." Balin grunted. "Then we make for Rivendell with haste." But Vale did not move. She stood still, watching Gandalf. "You know that is not the answer." Gandalf turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Then what do you propose?" Vale hesitated, as if weighing whether to speak the truth aloud. Then she stepped forward, lowering her voice. "You have seen its power, wizard. This is not a weapon to be hidden away in Elrond's libraries. This is something greater. The rune is not meant to be held, it is meant to be destroyed." Balin's head snapped up. "Destroyed?" His voice was thick with disbelief. "We nearly died getting the cursed thing. Now you want us to throw it away?" Vale's dark eyes flashed. "If we do not, the world will pay the price." Gandalf remained silent, staring into the firelight that flickered from his staff. Destroy it. The thought had lurked in his mind since the moment he had grasped the rune in the Hollow of Murmurs. He had felt its weight, its power, and he had felt the danger of it. The rune of Eldarin was not simply an artifact of magic. It was something older, something deeper. A remnant of the time when power was not divided between light and dark, but existed as a single force. Those who had created it had understood this, but those who sought it now did not. To keep it was to risk it falling into the wrong hands. And yet, Balin folded his arms. "And how, exactly, do you propose we destroy it? You saw what it did in the Hollow. That thing is older than any fire we can summon." Vale's expression did not waver. "There is one fire that can." A long silence fell between them. Then Gandalf nodded. "Orodruin." Balin's jaw clenched. "The fires of Mount Doom." Vale's voice was quiet but firm. "It was forged in fire. It must end in fire." The words settled heavily in the cold night air. Balin shook his head, pacing a few steps away before turning back. "This is madness. You want to march into Mordor?" Vale did not look away. "Would you rather let the daughters of Nihil take it?" The dwarf had no answer for that. Gandalf closed his eyes briefly. He had long ago learned that some choices had no easy path. The rune had been buried for a reason, its power left to slumber beneath the weight of time. And now he had woken it. He opened his eyes. "We go to Mordor." Balin let out a breath, cursing under his breath in Kuzal. But when he looked up, his eyes were clear. "Then we best not waste time." The journey into shadow. They did not sleep. By first light, they were already moving, their course now set for the dark lands of Mordor. The road was perilous, winding through ancient paths where few dared to tread. Balin said little, though Gandalf could see the storm of thoughts behind his eyes. Vale, too, was silent, leading them with the sure steps of one who had walked the paths of darkness before. Days passed in uneasy quiet. The rune remained hidden beneath Gandalf's robes, but its presence grew heavier with each step. It was not a thing that could be ignored. It whispered in the edges of his thoughts, not with words, but with the weight of something waiting to be remembered. And then, at last, they stood at the threshold of Mordor. The sky was thick with ash, the ground barren and cracked. Ahead, the mountain loomed, its peak wreathed in fire. Lost Rune. Gandalf felt the heat on his skin, even from here. The heart of Middle-earth's greatest darkness. And yet, it was here that the rune's fate must be decided. Balin exhaled sharply. "Well, here we are." Vale did not hesitate. "We must move quickly. The longer we linger, the more likely they will find us." And so they began their final climb. The ascent was grueling, the air thick with the weight of long-forgotten evil. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, watching, waiting. Halfway up the slope, the rune began to glow. Gandalf gritted his teeth as a sharp pain lanced through his palm. The rune was waking. It knew what was coming. And it was resisting. A voice echoed in his mind, deep and distant. "You would cast aside what was meant to be wielded?" He tightened his grip. "I will not be deceived." A sudden wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying with it a voice. "You are wrong, Istari. You are blind." From the shadows, they emerged. Figures draped in black, their faces hidden behind veils of shifting mist. The daughters of Nihil. Vale drew her blade without hesitation. No more warnings, then. Balin grinned darkly, hefting his axe. Good. The daughters did not speak. They did not charge. Instead, they raised their hands, and the shadows surged. The battle was swift and brutal. Dark tendrils lashed out, twisting through the air like living things. Gandalf raised his staff, summoning a wave of golden light that sent the darkness recoiling. Balin struck hard and fast, his axe cleaving through the nearest figure. But there were too many. Vale fought like a spectre herself, moving with the deadly grace of one who had once walked among them. But she knew this was not a battle they could win. "We must finish this," she shouted. Gandalf turned, the rune burning in his hand. He staggered forward, the weight of it pressing against his very soul. The fire of Lost Rune raged before him. And then, he cast it in. The rune struck the molten core, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the mountain screamed. A great wind tore through the air, and the sky burned with a blinding light. The daughters shrieked, their forms unraveling, dissolving into nothingness. The earth trembled beneath them, and for a moment, Gandalf feared the mountain itself would collapse. Then, silence. The room was gone. Balin staggered beside him, breathing heavily. Is it done? Gandalf exhaled slowly. Yes. Vale stood at the edge of the precipice, watching as the fire dimmed. Then let us leave this place. And so they did. As they descended the mountain, the weight of the room was no longer upon them. But Gandalf knew, power, once awoken, never truly vanished. And the world would always remember what had been lost. And now, this tale has reached its end. Deep within the darkness, a secret has been buried once more. The rune that once awakened has vanished into the flames, and the world breathes in quiet relief. But like the wind whispering through the trees, this story never truly ends, only becoming part of the flow of time, waiting to be told again on another quiet night. Let your mind drift, like stardust gently falling to the earth. Feel the peace of the night wrapping around you, turning every word into a soft and endless dream. Close your eyes, and let the world sleep with you.